most dangerous stretch of water on the entire planet is only 21 miles wide. The Strait of Hormuz is the absolute ultimate geopolitical choke point of the modern world. And for decades, the regime in Tehran has held the entire global economy completely hostage by threatening to close it. Every time tensions rise in the Middle East, the exact same terrifying threat is broadcast to the world. Iran confidently declares that they will deploy naval mines and fast attack boats to completely shut down the strait, because roughly 20% of the world's daily oil consumption must pass through that narrow, highly vulnerable corridor. If that maritime door slams shut, global oil prices will instantly shatter all historical records. Western economies will absolutely crash, and a massive global recession will begin within a matter of days. It is the ultimate geopolitical trump card, a brilliant strategy of holding the world's energy supply at gunpoint. But right now, that multi-billion-dollar extortion strategy is slowly, inevitably bleeding to death in the desert, because one incredibly wealthy Arab nation refused to sit quietly and wait for the economic apocalypse to happen. The United Arab Emirates decided that if they could not safely use the front door, they would simply build a massive escape hatch. They did not aggressively challenge the Iranian fast attack boats with their own naval destroyers. They did not start a highly explosive, unpredictable shooting war in the crowded waters of the Persian Gulf. Instead, they executed a silent $4.2 billion engineering masterstroke right under the enemy's nose. To understand the absolute genius of this specific maneuver, you have to look closely at the geographical map. The United Arab Emirates produces millions of barrels of crude oil every single day deep inside its massive desert oil fields. Historically, all of that oil had to be pumped to the Persian Gulf coast, loaded onto massive tankers, and sailed directly through Hormuz. The UAE realized that their entire national economy was completely dependent on the goodwill of a hostile adversary. They needed a way to get their massive oil reserves to the global market without ever entering that dangerous choke point. And they found their salvation on the exact opposite side of the Arabian Peninsula. They looked at the small, relatively quiet eastern emirate of Fujairah. Fujairah is geographically blessed because it sits directly on the coast of the Gulf of Oman, facing the massive Arabian Sea. It is located completely outside the Strait of Hormuz, with totally unrestricted, open access to the world's oceans. The strategic math was incredibly simple, but the physical execution was an absolute engineering nightmare. The UAE leadership ordered the immediate construction of the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline. This was not just a simple plumbing project, it was a massive, highly classified race against the geopolitical clock. The goal was to build a colossal steel artery stretching 240 miles across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. They needed to connect the massive Habshan oil fields in the west directly to the deep-water port of Fujairah in the east. If they could successfully complete this pipeline, they would completely bypass the Iranian naval threat forever. But the Arabian desert is not a flat, easy landscape for building massive industrial infrastructure. The engineers had to push a 48-inch wide steel pipe through shifting, heavily abrasive sand dunes. They had to battle extreme, completely suffocating temperatures that literally melted construction equipment, and the desert sand was not even the most terrifying obstacle standing in their way. To reach the safe waters of Fujairah, the pipeline had to cross the massive, incredibly rugged Hajar mountain range. You cannot simply build a massive oil pipe straight up a jagged, highly unstable rocky mountain. The construction crews were forced to blast deep, heavy tunnels directly through the solid bedrock of the mountains. They had to install massive, highly specialized pumping stations capable of pushing millions of gallons of heavy crude oil violently uphill. The sheer mechanical pressure required to push that much liquid over a mountain range is absolutely mind-boggling. The project suffered from massive delays, incredibly complex engineering setbacks, and skyrocketing financial budgets. The initial cost estimates were repeatedly shattered as the true difficulty of the terrain was finally understood. But the leadership in Abu Dhabi refused to stop the project, completely absorbing the massive $4.2 billion price tag. They knew that the cost of the pipeline was absolutely nothing compared to the cost of a closed Strait of Hormuz. If Iran shut down the strait for just 1 month, the UAE would lose tens of billions of dollars in blocked revenue. The pipeline was essentially a massive steel insurance policy designed to protect the economic future of the entire nation. Finally, after years of grueling, highly secretive construction, the colossal system was quietly activated. Deep in the western desert, massive industrial valves were turned, and the heavy crude oil began to surge through the steel. It flowed silently beneath the shifting sand dunes, aggressively pushed up and over the jagged Hajar mountains, and it finally arrived at the massive, heavily fortified storage terminals on the coast of Fujairah. The strategic impact of that very first drop of oil hitting the eastern coast cannot be overstated. The geopolitical map of the Middle East had just been permanently, irrevocably altered without a single shot being fired. the Abu Dhabi pipeline is capable of transporting roughly 1.5 million barrels of oil every single day. That is over half of the entire daily crude oil export of the United Arab Emirates. And during an absolute geopolitical crisis, the massive pumping stations can be redlined to push even more. The strategic realization of this achievement sent absolute shockwaves through the military command centers in Tehran. Their massive multi-billion-dollar threat to choke off the UAE's oil supply was completely neutralized overnight. If Iran mines the Strait of Hormuz tomorrow, the UAE will simply turn up the pressure on their massive desert pipeline. The massive commercial oil tankers no longer need to sail into the dangerous, highly restricted waters of the Persian Gulf. They can safely drop their massive anchors in the deep, unrestricted waters of the Gulf of Oman. They can fill their massive hulls with UAE crude oil and sail directly to Asia or Europe in complete safety. This quiet engineering marvel transformed the sleepy coastal town of Fujairah into a massive global energy hub almost overnight. The coastline is now completely dominated by massive, highly secure oil storage tanks and heavily guarded loading docks. It has become one of the most strategically important pieces of real estate on the entire global map. Other nations in the region are currently watching this massive strategic shift with extreme jealousy and intense interest. Saudi Arabia is aggressively expanding its own east-west pipeline to achieve the exact same geopolitical immunity. The era of the Persian Gulf being the absolute center of the oil universe is slowly coming to an end. The power is actively shifting toward the outer coastlines, away from the narrow, easily blocked choke points. The Iranian generals realize that their ultimate leverage is slowly evaporating into the desert air. A threat is only effective if the hostage actually believes they are trapped in the room. The United Arab Emirates just proved to the world that they have already built the back door and left the building. They completely disarmed a hostile, highly aggressive adversary using brilliant infrastructure instead of military force. It is a masterclass in asymmetrical geopolitical defense, executed with pure, unadulterated financial power. Of course, the pipeline itself represents a massive, highly critical vulnerability. It is a 240-mile-long static target sitting completely exposed in the desert. The UAE knows that if a shooting war actually begins, the pumping stations will be the absolute first targets on the enemy's list. That is exactly why the pipeline is protected by some of the most advanced air defense systems on the planet. Patriot missile batteries and advanced radar networks constantly scan the sky above the massive steel artery. The desert is constantly patrolled by heavily armed military units and advanced surveillance drones. They are protecting the $4.2 billion lifeline that completely guarantees their national survival. The silent war for the future of global energy is not just being fought by navies on the open water anymore. It is being fought deep underground, driven by massive mechanical pumps and pure steel. The next time a hostile regime threatens to shut down the global economy by closing a narrow stretch of water, remember the massive silent river of oil flowing steadily beneath the Arabian mountains. Geopolitics is a brutal, incredibly expensive game of high-stakes chess, and the United Arab Emirates just moved their most valuable piece completely off the dangerous side of the board. The Strait of Hormuz is still incredibly dangerous, but it is no longer the absolute ultimate trap. The multi-billion-dollar escape hatch is wide open, and the oil is flowing straight to the open sea.